right, Gareth. So if I could have you get us started today by talking a little bit about your background and what it is that you do today.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been in a procurement supply chain role for something like 26 years now. So yeah, qualified from university, worked my way through different procurement environments. So, FMCG, healthcare, financial services, and now more recently, logistics and e-commerce. So my current role, I work for a company called Whistl. We're a UK-based e-commerce and logistics business. So what does that mean? We provide business mail services where we collect, process, sort, and hand over to a delivery partner for mail, but importantly also packets and parcels as well because of the growth in e-commerce. And we also provide an eFulfillment service. So we have warehouses full of other people's products where we do the storage and then the pick, pack, and then dispatch. So there's some other bits, but those are the kind of primary activities that we undertake. We're about equivalent to $1 billion turnover, about 2,000 people. And my role there is what we call Business Services and ESG Director. So it's kind of a shared services role where we look after procurement, property, facilities, fleet, some other bits, but importantly as well, ESG, because a lot of those functions have such a kind of close link, and ESG can be integral to that. So that's how I'm currently keeping myself busy.
Well, it sounds like enough to keep you out of trouble.
Yeah.
Now, you've got the background in procurement. How is it that you picked up the ESG portion of your role?
I think look, probably partly because of a personal interest and a personal belief. I would be lying if it wasn't also because maybe I was a little bit frustrated about how we were doing some of it. But I think you can't, I suppose if you're doing a good job in procurement, you're aware of this stuff, right? And you're aware of the impact and the influence and the opportunity you have to make an impact. So I think I probably pushed to get more involved. But because, as in any organization, Scope 3 is such a big challenge, there's a natural piece there. But I guess because of the fleet piece, which I'm responsible for us as a business, our biggest carbon impact is what we do on the road with our vehicles. So that ties in what we do with our buildings. So the property and the real estate piece ties in. I think and we can talk about this a bit later, but where we've succeeded is integrating it into all of those things means it's kind of found its natural home.
Yeah. Now, you talked about initially sort of pushing to play a bigger role in ESG because you saw some things that were frustrating. What are some of the things that you've seen procurement change, even if it's just new information that's being brought to light during the sourcing or the contract management or the supplier management process? And maybe what's some of the fallout from that where you've started to see change happen in the business?
I suppose quite a lot has changed in 26 years. It's quite scary when you think about, how long we've been doing it. And we've kind of moved from, paper back in the day to portals, right? And you can remember like having to issue tenders on paper and them arriving in envelopes and everything, but that's how old I am. But yeah, we've moved kind of from paper to portals. I think in some of the places where I worked historically, procurement was seen as more of a barrier than a benefit, right? Maybe a bit of a burden rather than a benefit. And I think that has absolutely changed if you're going to do a good job of it. And I think that is continuing, but the pace of change is probably accelerating. So, I think we have quite a good technology stack. We're not a huge team, right? We've got big revenues and we've got a big footprint and I suppose big responsibility, but we have quite a good technology package to do the job, but you can see how that is changing more. And, everybody's talking about AI. I'm not sure everyone understands it. I don't think I do, just to be clear. But, the art of the possible, I guess, is intriguing. I think it is a further step, isn't it? Before, you start to say, well, we have an RFX portal, and we can automate some of the activities that people in procurement do. AI, I guess, will further enhance that. But procurement's about influencing, and it's about people for
Yeah.
me. And that bit doesn't change. I guess you've just got to think differently. So can we use systems and tech to do some of the repetitive tasks, some of the grunt work? But it's what do you do with that time? And those skills, I mean, you often hear it, don't you? People talking about the shortage of talent, or people have got to have the right soft skills. None of this is new. I just think it becomes more and more important, because that's going to become more and more of your role, and you have to connect, you have to engage internally, externally, to do a decent job.
Well, and it's interesting too, both between the fact that ESG as terminology may be relatively new, right? Coming over from the investing world, but corporate social responsibility, I'll speak from a US perspective, goes back to the 1960s with Chrysler. So not exactly a new concept. And yet the expectations of these programs are completely different. The tools that we have to execute against them are completely different. Even just to think about being able to bring in AI to change how we process data or how we analyze the spend, it sort of takes an intent that's enduring. Because I think if we look back decades and decades, I mean, you said 26 years, I'm not far behind you. If we look back to the beginning of our tenure, this idea was already there, and yet it had already changed substantially from where it began in different places around the world. And it seems like that pace of change, both in terms of visibility into companies' programs, and then again, how they meet those expectations and the tools that they bring to bear. I don't know, maybe it's an iterative process, but the way that we approach these challenges and what we ask of ourselves, I think has probably changed a ton, even in the last 3 to 5 years, right?
Yes, agree. But I think there's a real danger as well. So I think I mentioned earlier about, maybe procurement was seen as a bit of a barrier, or maybe they can't do department. It may be back office type thing. And I think that's changed in so many businesses, because through doing a good job, people see the value. I think the real risk that we start to do is start to create new burdens with good intentions, right, but possibly with bad outcomes. Because
Yes.
we speak to our own commercial team who manage incoming tenders. We have a really good relationship, because the insight that we can get from them is brilliant. But we ask more and more of our suppliers, and whether that's through an RFX process, or whether that's through ongoing due diligence. And I sometimes sit there and look at it and think, my God, this is a lot to ask a company. So, for example, we want to know everything now, because the due diligence is important, and that might be about modern slavery, that might be about anti-bribery, that might be about ESG, that might be about diversity, right? And at the same time, we're saying to organizations, and we're under pressure from customers, right, to say, let's have a more diverse supply base. Let's do that. That's a good thing. So now we're going to ask all our suppliers about how diverse they are. And some of them don't have the data, and some of them are starting to get the data, and some are very mature. But, we're starting to say, well, how many females do you have on your board, right? How many of our suppliers are charities, right? How many are working as SMEs? Great. So we've got some SMEs. Now let's ask them loads and loads of information. They're a small business. This becomes a massive burden. It's easy for us to automate and ask for that information, but it's a hell of a burden on some of the suppliers. And I do worry there's a disconnect there. And in the ESG space, I guess in particular, the reporting landscape and what is relevant to you as a business is quite fluid. I don't know how it is in the States, but certainly here, it's changing continuously, and I think we're in quite good touch about what's coming down the track. But that in itself is a big piece. So we're asking all this information, we're harvesting it, but I think we have to ask, so what do we actually do with it?
And I think that's such a great thing to highlight, because it's funny, you talk about intentions versus outcomes. And it depends. Some industries are more regulated than others. Some companies, if selling
Mm.
to the government, are more regulated than others. But around these ESG programs, a lot of procurement teams, operational teams are incentivized, I don't know, for lack of a better expression, I'll say, to try. So they're incentivized to say, okay, how many diverse suppliers did you invite over the course of the year? And so in some ways, if our good intent is to, over time, increase the amount of the company's spend with any kind of supplier that falls under the ESG umbrella, it does begin with finding out how many suppliers are out there that potentially meet business needs and also cover us in those areas. But in the short term, we're probably creating more churn than results in some cases, because we're saying to these, in some cases small, but minority owned or B Corp certified companies, hey, come fill out all this paperwork. We may know in the back of our minds the business is not going to move most of their spend to work with this new supplier, but check the box. We asked if they were certified. And so it's like we're stuck in this middle ground where we're trying great intentions, but not managing to connect with those outcomes that we all believe in and want to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe there's, and I know certainly in some places we do this, where there's a kind of early bit of triage before you burn somebody. Because can you imagine if that's your first interaction, right, with a business, fill in these, 200 questions. And that's before we get onto anything to do with information security and whatever else, right?
And that's 600 questions. So
yeah, exactly. And then we're going to screw them down on price. There's not much margin left. Why would they bother? So I think we just have to be very careful that we're not creating a monster hit.
Yeah. And yet and congratulations for this, Whistl has achieved gold status, received that rating from EcoVadis, which means you've not just had the good intentions, you've driven the right outcomes, which does mean there has to be some amount of data capture and business objectives and KPIs that go along with that. Yeah. How have you set out very specific targets and objectives for the ESG program in order to earn this certification without, or let's just say, avoiding as much of that churn as possible, so that you're getting past the intentions to the outcomes?
That's a really good question. How have we done that? Right, I guess so. We probably embarked on this about 3 years ago. So we are really proud of the EcoVadis bit, and I'm particularly proud of it because I think I said to you when I said maybe a few years ago, 3 years ago, we can do this better, right? And we have, year on year, we've improved. We've gone bronze, silver, gold. Now, if I'm being really honest with you, our whole ESG strategy and our net zero plan, we haven't done this alone. We've engaged an external consultancy who we still retained for some advice, but in effect, they helped us understand what was material to the business. So when I say material, I guess they do this double materiality assessment where they survey and interview the staff in the business, they survey and interview customers, they survey and interview leadership, and also some of the suppliers. And in effect, what that does is brings some focus and prioritization about what we should be doing.
Yeah.
So, often we're asked about what do we do about, water management. And again, we have to fill in lots of questionnaires about this stuff from customers. Yeah. But we don't really consume much water. So we can say, we have some rainwater harvest in our buildings, but we're not going to spend time talking about it because it really isn't material. But we know what matters to our employees, and we know what matters to our customers, and we know where the leadership view is. That alignment means that you make progress more easily because it's focused on stuff that matters and that people care about. So I think we've probably decluttered some of it. We've got some focus areas, and they are the things that the business and the people are behind.
Yeah. And I think your point about water management is a great example, because when we say ESG, It's 3 letters. It's become such a common little acronym to have included in so many things. But if you actually step back and think about the entire breadth of the programs that might be covered under ESG, depending on where you are, what you buy, what you make, what you sell, how you sell it, water management, incredibly important. One teeny tiny little bullet on one crowded slide. And so being able to make the connection, whether you're a company that's trying to drive ESG progress or you're in procurement and you're trying to figure out for this category that I'm sourcing, I don't want to just ask ESG, what are the ESG relevant initiatives that this supplier has the ability to move the needle on? Procurement can be thinking about that in both directions.
Yeah, and I think it's quite rewarding, but it is such a powerful position. I mean, like I say, we aren't a procurement team of dozens of people, right? What we have to do is make sure that we prioritize well, we focus well, and we embed stuff into what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I think what we do well in the kind of procurement space is ESG is firmly embedded in what we do and how we do it. It's not a bolt-on. So every time that we're having a conversation, and it rubs off, right? It rubs off on other people in the business. When you're having meetings with people about requirements or direction or aspirations, they're often bringing up the question and saying, how does this tie in, or how can this impact? What about the carbon, right? What about some of the social responsibilities? And I think it's making it an everyday conversation. So I'm really lucky. We've got a terrific head of ESG. She's very passionate about it. And she's also somebody who gets something done. But for example, she spends a lot of time with our internal comms team, making sure it is a daily conversation. Right? She spends time talking to salespeople about what it is we're doing and how it works. And she interacts with the procurement team, the property team, the facilities team. But there's one of her, and she makes sure that they know what their objectives are, and it's firmly embedded in what we do and how we do it. So everyone's got their own responsibility almost.
Now, when we think about how the embedded nature of your ESG vision starts to impact everyone's work, how would you say you were able to embed it, say, in conversations with internal stakeholders? So procurement's not ultimately going to decide who gets the contract. Maybe we make a recommendation, but you have to have that conversation right from the outset in the project so that it's embedded in people's mindset before it's embedded in the process and then embedded, hopefully, in the outcomes.
Yeah.
How has that played out around getting decision makers or budget holders to buy in and fully understand the important role they are able to play in helping Whistl meet these objectives?
I think this goes back to the materiality bit, because you're doing it at the out. We're not trying to push water uphill here, right? We did it at the outset, and we said these are the things that are important to the people, and the people being leadership, employees, customers, right? And if they're important, you've kind of opened the door. There may be arguments, there may be tensions about how you do some of it or the extent of what you do, but the framework and the scope is kind of already done. So that takes away some of the argument. You're not pushing water uphill. I think the other thing is it has to be a business benefit, not a business burden. Right. And I had a meeting with some people 2 weeks ago, and they were really struggling with this stuff and they couldn't get traction. They're like, how did you get traction? And when you talk to them, they try it. It wasn't that well coordinated, and they were trying to push issues onto people when they didn't really see the benefit. So if you get the benefit clear, you get some pull. Yeah. And I know that's really simplistic, but that is kind of make sure there's a benefit. Most of the ESG progress that we've made generally has a clear business benefit as well. So, for example, if we introduce greener trucks, they're more fuel efficient. Well, so not only does it reduce the CO2 emissions, but it reduces our consumption. Reducing consumption is good. Yep. That reduces also, therefore, the amount of fuel we have to pay for. That's a big tick, right? If we, all of our buildings have LED lights in them, and they're all on sensors, right? again, the business case is simple. So I think you start to build up some credibility with the finance team, with the operations team, because it helps their budgets, because what you're doing has a business benefit as well as an environmental or an ESG benefit. And there's lots of other examples, but if you, I think, get some quick wins under your belt and you are aligned to what people agree, it's not that difficult. Maybe, and this might be a bit controversial, some of the struggles are because people are pushing the wrong issues. Maybe.
Yeah. And I do think, and this is funny because this is a classic procurement lesson, it doesn't matter how important the outcome is, mandates don't work. That is not enough to get people to do the things we want them to do, even if it's for an extremely good reason. And so it's instead making it easy and even natural to do the thing that we want people to do, incentivizing them versus, using the stick, right? It's taking that more of a carrot approach. I'd be interested to know too, whether any of the stories circle back. You talked about your head of ESG working with sales to arm them with the stories to tell, to go to market with. Do you get the opportunity to hear how that converts in terms of positive reception, the type of feedback, the sort of impact that has, so that you can connect the work you and your team and internal decision makers make with sort of that top line impact of this investment?
Absolutely. And actually, I think it's really rewarding, isn't it? Because, give you a really good example. When we announced that we'd got EcoVadis Gold, we communicate that to the customer. So we're not doing this in isolation. We have to talk to a number of our customers and our suppliers about what we're doing on a regular basis. So, and some of them, customer-wise, put us under pressure to achieve certain things. And they're our customers, so of course we listen and we say, how can we do this? At what pace can we do this? Their feedback's been amazing, right? They want to get on calls with us. They want to talk to us. And that interaction, these are familiar faces, right? Because there's really good dialogue around this space. They're thrilled. They want to know more. This is the great thing in the ESG space. People share practice. These aren't trade secrets. People like to talk about this stuff, and they are happy, I guess, to share the successes, but almost more importantly, it's share the cock-ups. And, we have them too.
Everyone does.
Maybe it's my age and maybe I'm getting older and grumpier, but the one thing that drives me up the wall is when I go into any of our buildings and we have segregated waste bins for different waste streams. And you look and there's a plastic bin and it's got paper in it. And the paper bin is right next to the plastic one. Yeah. And I can feel like so, we ask people, well, how do you overcome this? What do you do? And some people incentivize people. Maybe it's better communication. Maybe you'll still have it, but people like to share their successes and their failures. And that's really powerful, I think.
And especially when those successes come back. And of course, as an organization, you should be proud of the gold rating. But everyone that played any role in that process, no matter how slight, gets to take a share of that victory. And hopefully that creates sort of like a cycle of positive reinforcement. Or you really only need a couple of those success stories to tip the scales. And then everyone, to your point about embedding the ideas, starts to think, oh, well, here at Whistl, this is how we do things. This is our way. And this is part of our value proposition. It's not just, oh, we have a wonderful head of ESG. Let's all celebrate her. It's no, we've all done this together with customers, with suppliers as a team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, there are so many success stories where people have done really good work and you're right, they achieve together, and that respect is that we got here by all doing our bit. I think the only piece is that obviously next year, well, it's going to have to be platinum, isn't it? And then I just get people rolling their eyes at me.
We're going to hold you to that.
That's quite a terrible example.
You talked before about benefit, right? And so there does have to be an ROI, and, certainly reducing consumption is good, but typically that comes with reduced expenditure, which sort of reinforces that idea. And in a lot of cases, especially when ESG is pursued for PR reasons, let's say, you have these incredibly large multinational corporations that have the budget to just throw money at
Yeah.
ESG, which may result in sort of a lot of noise and attention, but not necessarily result in any change. And I know you mentioned your team is not enormous. I'm sure you don't have excess headcount. No one does. Um, has that potentially actually been an advantage to where it makes ESG in and of itself more sustainable because everything has to pass the test of creating the benefit in order to keep that change going?
Yes. Yeah, it does, because I think we have to be really efficient with it. And, there are things that we talk about and we have to say that's not for this year, right? Maybe it's interesting, but it's not important right now because, we move in quite a fast paced environment. Delivery and execution is really important. Efficiency is important. And that probably is a flow down and a cascade from the fact that our business is about high volume and low margin. So the kind of efficiency mentality is well embedded, because that's how we make more money. We don't make money by charging huge prices, because generally we're in quite competitive markets. So I think people within the business have an efficient mindset, and with that comes the focus. So yeah, we will only bite off what we can chew. We will focus on the areas that we said we'll do. Go back to that materiality and what's in the program. There's
Right.
there's a great documentary about some Olympic rowers and the British rowing team, right? And they
Is it the boys in the boat?
yeah, right.
Yeah,
And if you can only talk about it if it makes the boat go faster.
that's right.
And if it doesn't make the boat go faster, just don't talk about it. We're not that ruthless, but I think it is that kind of mentality, so that everyone knows what they're doing. Get them to stay in lane and deliver, because they've got the expertise and they've got the role and the empowerment to deliver that. Do that bit. Do that. Do it well, and then we'll move on to
Yeah.
the next bit.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting thing about that is you talked a little bit earlier about sort of maybe winning over finance to some of these specific initiatives. Everyone playing a role can look different in each case. And around something like ESG, if it's going to be impactful and if it's going to work for the business, you almost need finance there to be somewhat grumpy up to their reputation and say, yes, but there needs to be some sort of threshold of returns, or we need to know that we can sustain this if we go down this road. In some ways, as long as it's constructive, pushback can actually be as much of a contribution as making the program successful
Yeah.
as people that are willing to sign on and say, yeah, let's switch our supplier and go with this other company because they offer us this capability. You do also need the people going, whoa, hold on, guys. Like, we need to be thoughtful and purposeful and measured about this. So it doesn't always just mean saying yes.
Yeah, and I think so. It's interesting. We often use the term trailblazers. You can't, in the business, afford to have somebody in a procurement role who thinks something's a great idea trying to be a trailblazer, because if you haven't got the people on board, it ain't going anywhere, right? And also, we have to always be mindful about how much change we're bringing into the business. So bear in mind, there's other change programs that aren't ESG related that maybe have to happen. It's an upgrade of a finance system. It's a redevelopment of this IT, right? We maybe have to bring in new equipment, machinery, and process reorganization. That's critical to keep the business moving. So then somebody comes along and says, I'd really like to do this because it's lovely. Okay, but where's the benefit, as you say? And we're back to that. It's got to have a benefit. How much effort is involved? Because it's the same as any CapEx decision, right? You've got a cost to invest. You've got the amount of effort that it brings and the amount of change, because there's a finite amount of resource in the business to bring about change. So you can't go trailblazing with something because it won't get anywhere. So you're right. The pushback is just as important to make sure that we stay on plan, I guess.
Yeah. And I think what I appreciate right about that is whether it's trying to do something that will, lower emissions, or whether it's trying to make sure that taking the time to change a process or implement a new system is going to be worth the effort. This is back to your point about it being embedded. This has to be the way we think about everything, because there really isn't a lot of space for talking about the things that don't make the boat go faster. And it doesn't just work around sustainability or human rights or diversity or any of those ESG initiatives. Once that thinking and that process and that sort of everybody has a role here to ask the questions, point out the metrics, maybe suggest that, does this really align with our current short-term priorities? There is sort of a cycle back effective continuous improvement where once you can learn to change your thinking for ESG, that's not just limited to ESG. It actually changes your thinking about every single thing that the company does and how the teams work together.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I suppose we have detractors in the business the same as anybody else. Right? And there are probably those that think, ESG is a kind of fluffy subject. Right? But actually, more and more, the reporting requirements are far from fluffy, right? Far from, I don't know whether you've seen
They
this.
couldn't be less fluffy.
This is the hard work, some of this stuff. And, you've got to have the right data streams, and it's real structured stuff. But actually, you do start to see and think differently. We were talking this morning about voltage optimization, right? So how do we use our assets more efficiently, and how do we reduce the consumption? There's all these conversations, but it all relates back to that will reduce the emissions, right? That will reduce the consumption, but also the data guides you to where some of your hotspots are. And this isn't just an ESG thing. It's a business thing. This is really powerful stuff now, because where, and we can look across our different sites and go, well, why is this consumption of energy so much higher than this? What are they doing there that's different? What are the assets that are different? And then you go, oh, actually, we've got some really old inefficient assets in there. Let's have a look at them. You change them out, you reduce your consumption, you reduce your costs. So yeah, I think it's far from fluffy now.
Yeah. And it's only going to continue to get less fluffy, right? So as you said, standing on gold, next stop platinum, right? As you learn more, I'm sure in some ways it becomes more challenging to drive the same level of change, but you also are able to see some of those additional opportunities that when you're dealing with the low-hanging fruit, you kind of can't get visibility beyond them to some of this higher level, more sophisticated stuff. And I think it's important to talk about. I mean, yes, people do want to talk about what they're doing and where their successes are around ESG, but it's just as important to share the challenges and the roadblocks and the internal hurdles and the hard conversations that have to happen, because it's ultimately as supply chains that we will drive the difference. No one company can ultimately do this by themselves. Gareth, any final advice or thoughts that you wanted to share, either about how you're continuing to find ways to challenge yourself and your team to look forward, or how procurement is working with the ESG lead to make sure that you're doing everything that you can? How are you looking out into the rest of 2024, knowing that the expectation is you will hold ground, but then also continue to improve? Where is your mind on that challenge?
So we've got a meeting about this very subject on Monday. I think this isn't just an ESG point, but I think it's a procurement point. You made the point earlier about not many people have excess resource anymore. The technology makes demand instant, right? And the technology is instant because you can send me a message straight away and say, can you do this? In years gone by, you'd wait for somebody to deliver documents with a courier, right? The BlackBerry changed everything. Everything was instant, and we're sharing stuff immediately. But people still need to do stuff, right? And I think we've got this situation where we don't have lots and lots of resource. So focusing on getting your head out of the weeds is really difficult. Because, it's very easy, head down, do work. right? But this does go full circle back to the point about how does AI affect what we're doing. It will bring lots of benefits, but I think my learnings are you've got to talk to people, right? So lift your head up every now and then and go and talk to people, go to events, right? Go and share with people, network, because you learn so much from, and I think this is true in procurement, it's true in property, right? But particularly in industry, people are happy to talk about this stuff. And
Yeah.
someone somewhere has probably got a really good solution to the problem you're facing. Now, if you're just sitting there scratching your head, you're not going to work that out. But if you're out there engaging with people, talking, sharing, understanding, God, it makes life so much easier.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, you're doing that literally right now. And there may be someone that has an idea for something that you're currently facing. Maybe it's around voltage. And there may be someone that is trying to figure out, how am I going to get this virtuous cycle started in my company, that hears the thoughts from you and says, Gareth had it. That's exactly what I need to go do. If
Yeah.
we've got someone listening in and regardless has met you from this forum and wants to reach out and connect and have that conversation, what is the best way for them to get in touch?
LinkedIn, I guess, is probably good. Really easy way. And what a great networking tool it is, right? I mean, the content
Absolutely.
is changing over time, and sometimes you're thinking, is this the place for this? But it's hugely powerful because, look, how did we get introduced on LinkedIn? You're the other side of the world. It just makes the
Yep.
world and networks smaller and more accessible.
Absolutely. Well, Gareth, congratulations once again. Keep up the good work. Keep us posted, most importantly. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise.
No, thanks for having me.